So right now, we have our ATEA-Talk by Dr. Arun Sundararajan on digital revolution and its impact on the economy. So Dr. Arun Sundararajan is an NEC faculty fellow, professor of information, operations and management sciences, doctoral coordinator at the Stern School of Business, New York University, and member of World Economic Forum. Please put your hands together for Dr. Arun Sundararajan.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I'm a digital expert and I can't put on the microphone, then it sort of like, challenges whether I am actually a digital expert, right? So I'm going to sort of stick with the theme that has been created, and I have 50 slides, but I'm not going to use them. So I'm a professor at New York University. I've been a professor there for 20 years. Much like most business school professors, I do lots of other things as well. Some of this is work with the World Economic Forum. I also spend a lot of time working with government on different things relating to how do you adapt to a world that is increasingly digital. A lot of my work and my research at NYU through my career has been trying to understand how digital technologies change things. And companies around the world and governments around the world are struggling to deal with the consequences, for example, of sort of having platform-mediated exchange through platforms like Facebook and Google, having services like Uber and Airbnb challenge local regulations. One of the courses I teach at NYU is about high-tech entrepreneurship. That's not going to be what I'm going to talk about today, but since this is an entrepreneurs gathering, I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes on it. I started a company more than 20 years, probably 20 years ago, during the dot-com bubble, like at the height of the dot-com bubble. And after I came back to NYU after that experience, I always wanted to teach entrepreneurship, but I always had this feeling that you can't really teach entrepreneurship in the classroom. And so for 3 years, the course I've been running is we send students to successful early stage startups, Series B or later, typically 50 to 200 employees, 10 to 100 million in funding. Technology companies that are all based in New York City. And the students spend the semester with the company. They also are coming to class, and they're trying to get a sense for what it is like to sort of run a successful early stage tech company, but more importantly, what makes these companies lose their way. And the theme that has emerged is actually quite simple. It's that companies that successfully get funding and then are sort of on their journey towards sort of like building a large company often lose their way because they stop listening to their customers. And I tell students this at the beginning of the course, and they're sort of disappointed. They're like, is this all you have to tell us? Like, you listen to your customers. Drucker talked about the importance of sort of paying attention to your customers, but then through the semester they get this understanding that there are a number of forces that can cause you to stop actually listening to what your customer wants. You have investors who have set metrics for you, and you're trying to hit these metrics, and so you're going towards accomplishing those metrics and ignoring everything else. You often have founders who are wedded to a certain vision of their product, who are wedded to a particular instantiation. You have engineering teams who believe that the product must look like this. You have processes that have been put in place in the company that are designed to fulfill a certain customer need. And so you're going to fulfill that customer need irrespective of what your customers are telling you that they want. And so the one lesson that comes out of this that I want you guys to take away before I get into talking about what I really want to talk about is, remember the simple mantra, sort of successful early stage companies often lose their way because they stop listening to their customers. So keep listening to your customers. It's a lot harder than you think. But it's what's going to prevent that sort of massive gap between your product and the market emerging sort of over time as you start to focus on other things. So one of the things I've been focusing on for the last 7 years is a topic called the sharing economy. I wrote a book about this 3 years ago, and it follows sort of a trajectory of me having been interested in how digital technologies change business. So 15, 16, 17 years ago, the most interesting changes to business were in the digital industries. Napster was emerging. After Napster came the digital music services. The Amazon Kindle had not yet launched, but there were some early ebook services. We were starting to read newspapers on our computers instead of on the broadsheet. The digital video was in its infancy, and there was sort of this pattern of, maybe the business models of these industries are going to change because the product has become digital. And it was a very interesting time where you didn't need a physical object to deliver the product. You didn't have to buy a CD or get a newspaper or get a book. You could actually get the product in its pure digital form. And what this ended up doing was conferring a lot of strategic advantage to companies that controlled the interface. So people who had sort of physical distribution networks found that those distribution networks weren't as important, and there was a lot of business opportunity in thinking about how do I become the interface between the company and the consumer. So how do I become that software interface, that storefront interface, that rendering interface, the thing that converts the digital product into the thing of actual value to the consumers. So that was 10, 15 years ago. The reason why I got interested in the sharing economy was that around 2011, I started to see the same kind of rhetoric being used by companies about wanting to be the interface, about disrupting an industry using digital technology, except they weren't talking about digital industries. I saw this happening in car rental. I saw this happening in short-term accommodation. I saw this happening in small business lending, in venture capital and philanthropy. I saw early examples in the grocery business. Today I'm seeing early examples in the energy sector. And the language was the same, that I want to be the interface that sort of connects a crowd of people to a set of customers. But the industries were very physical world industries. And I started to get interested in what the scope of digital transformation might be. It may not be just the digital industries, it could be the physical world industries as well. And this is what led me to realize that over the course of the 20th century, especially in the second half of the 20th century, in the US, in Europe, Western Europe, in Japan, we created a certain kind of economy that was predicated on one particular model of business, of organizing economic activity. And this model sort of was exemplified by people working for large companies that produced goods and services that were branded and delivered them to customers. And so starting about 1960, a vast majority of the US workforce, for example, provided labor and talent to a large company in exchange for a salary. Okay, and this became the dominant way of how the economic activity of the world was organized. And so when I started to study the early sharing economy platforms, I began to realize that we were actually inventing a new way of organizing economic activity that I believe today is going to rival sort of the industrial capitalism model of large companies employing people full-time as the 21st century progresses. That more and more industries are going to have this crowd-based capitalism or this platform-based model that emerges as not just sort of something on the fringes, but as the mainstream way of delivering goods and services. Let me give you some examples just to sort of situate this. I mean, how many of you have taken an Uber? Okay. How many of you have stayed in an Airbnb? Reasonable. How many of you have hosted on Airbnb? Had someone stay in your home not a lot of people. I think Krishna is like proud Airbnb host, wonderful. How many of you have watched a video on YouTube? I'm not asking you what video. Okay, so let's take YouTube as the example, right? It's because this is a good example of crowd-based capitalism. So when I was a teenager, I would watch television. We'd sit with friends, we'd watch Doordarshan. There were two different sort of entities involved in the production and delivery of those services. So when I came to the United States, we'd watch NBC. You had the large companies that were producing the television content, the movies, and so on. Then you had another set of companies that were delivering it to you, either through the cables or through the airwaves. If you contrast that with YouTube, what you have is still one large company, YouTube, owned by Google, has more subscribers or more viewers than any television channel in history. It is aggregating demand from people, saying that people are going there to get video content. It's providing some search and discovery, like you can search for what you're looking for, whatever it is you're looking for. And it's providing some trust and risk management. Parents are comfortable having their kids use YouTube after a certain point because they know that there's certain kinds of content that isn't going to be on YouTube. And so these three capabilities, aggregating the demand, providing search and discovery, and providing some trust and risk management, is what the platform is doing. But it's not actually producing the content. The content is now being produced by a distributed and heterogeneous crowd. Some of them are large movie studios like Taylor Swift, famous musicians. Some of them are specialists, like Lily Singh, who earned like $10 million last year with that particular brand of humor that my daughter is very fond of, which is sort of basically like Lily Singh claim to fame is like making fun of Indian parents. Basically, this is sort of like how she sort of. And then there are tens of thousands of others who are making a decent living on YouTube, putting their content up there for advertising, and there are millions of others who just sort of put content up there for fun. So there's a video of me hang gliding on YouTube. I sort of put it up there to share with my parents, and I didn't set the privacy settings right, and so it's out there, and like 50 people have watched it. So me hang gliding is entertainment to someone. But the point I'm getting to is that this is a pattern. You have the same sort of platform-based business that has emerged in small business lending. Funding Circle in the UK aggregates the demand, but actually doesn't provide the funding. The funding comes from a distributed crowd of people. AngelList and Circular are platforms for venture capital. They don't have GPs and LPs, and they're not making funding decisions. They're aggregating the demand, but the funding is provided by amateurs like me, professional VCs. Kickstarter is a platform that aggregates demand for philanthropy. GetAround and Turo in the United States are platforms that aggregate the demand, provide search and discovery, trust and risk management for car rental, but the actual cars you rent are not owned or leased by GetAround and Turo. They come from a distributed crowd of people. Some people are renting out their own cars, some people have created a business of 10 cars that they're running. City Car Share in San Francisco, which operates through GetAround, has 300 cars that are operating through the platform. I've seen early examples of this in healthcare. I've seen early examples of this in grocery. There's a platform called La Ruche Tiroli that is aggregating demand for groceries, and then the farmers, the people who catch the fish, who sell the meat, are actually connecting directly with the people who want to buy the groceries. The batteries are not sort of reliable enough to store for a long period of time the solar energy that we generate from roof panels today, but in a few years they will be. And when that happens, we'll see these platform-based models start to take over the energy sector as well. Okay, and then you have Airbnb, which is sort of a famous example of crowd-based capitalism, what I call crowd-based capitalism. They aggregate the demand for people who are looking for short-term accommodation. They provide search and discovery. Like you can find a place in Turin, you can find a place in Goa, you can find a place in Shanghai. And they provide some trust. This person is vetted, so you can stay in their place or hand over the keys of your apartment. But then the actual sort of production and delivery, in some sense, of the short-term accommodation is coming from 3 million hosts, more than 3 million hosts around the world. And we often still think of Airbnb as being on the fringes, but just to give you a sense for how big they've become, On New Year's Eve last year, 12/31/2017, there were more people staying in an Airbnb than in Marriott, Starwood, and Hilton combined. And these are the world's two largest hotel chains. And so the extent to which this platform-based business has taken over that industry. And Airbnb's growth curve is like this, right? Marriott, Starwood, and Hilton are like that. And so it will probably be bigger than like the 5 or 10 largest hotel chains in the world in a few months. So how are they accomplishing this? And this is sort of the second main point I want to make. Of course, people have mobile phones, people have digital technology, and this creates a lot of opportunity to look for industries in which there's inefficiency and to say, let me come up with a new delivery model for this. Right? I mean, Airbnb were the first people who thought about the idea that you could connect with, connect people who are looking for space with people who have space. But they succeeded while other people failed because they designed a product that actually sort of took into account what is the host worried about, what is the guest worried about. At their core, they're not a technology company, they're a design company. They have thought very carefully and worked through, what is the design of a product that will make this work at scale. And I'm increasingly seeing that in successful tech entrepreneurial companies, that the technology is part of it, like a scalable model and being able to sort of keep up with demand, but the design of the product, not just sort of the software architecture, but the design of the experience is an increasingly important part of what leads to success. But an important part of that design is making sure that I can take this leap of trust. Right? I mean, because we've all perhaps, many of us have shopped on Amazon, many of us perhaps shopped on eBay. So you say, well, 20 years ago, eBay created enough trust for me to buy something from someone I don't know. So this is not new, but it is new, right? Because Airbnb is creating enough trust that you sleep in a stranger's spare bedroom or hand over the keys of your apartment to a stranger. BlaBlaCar is a platform based out of Paris. They operate in 20 countries. Their product is people selling seats in their cars when you travel from one city to another. So you're driving from, say, Paris to Lyon, you can say, I'm driving my BMW, I've got good leather seats, tinted glass, air conditioning, I'm playing soft jazz, I'm not too talkative, lots of legroom. They even have ratings on people. You rate yourself as blah, 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 or blah, 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 depending on how popular you are. And there are others who will sort of have a smaller car, like windows down, master pockets, and sort of 10 euros, say, smoking outside the window. Now, the interesting thing is that BlaBlaCar has created enough trust in the platform to allow people to take that leap and say, I'm willing to get into a stranger's car and be driven on the highway to another city. Okay, so this is a fundamentally different level of trust from, say, eBay or Amazon. And BlaBlaCar today carries 3 times as many people every day as Amtrak. In France alone, they carry 5 times as many people every 3 months as the train network Eurostar. And so they have shown us how to create sort of international transportation infrastructure in a platform-based model by tapping into assets that other people have. And again, it's founded on trust. I keep coming back to trust because I'm a student of the history of business, and I found that every time a new way of generating commercial trust emerges, it completely transforms how economic activity is organized. We used to have trust that was embedded in sort of community. We don't need to trade with people in our villages. Then we had government-induced trust. Then we had courts, contracts. Sort of people this allowed us to sort of trade with other people who were, not known to us, but there was a contract that would enforce it. Then we had branded trust, sort of like a fourth page. You go to Starbucks, you buy a cup of coffee, you don't sign a contract because you're just relying on the fact that the brand wants you to come back tomorrow, and so they will give you a good quality. And so the fifth wave of trust, digital trust, each of these four waves sort of change how we organize the world's economic activity. And so as you contemplate technologies like blockchain, as you think about sort of will people trust like systems that are artificially intelligent and sort of involving human beings. One of the things to think about is what are the changes that are being induced because of digital trust, and how is this going to reorganize economic activity, and what are the business opportunities that are created. So I did also want to talk to you guys about the future of work, but there are people at the back waving cards at me saying that I don't have any more time, so I'll stop here. But I'm easy to find online. I'll be heading back to New York in a few minutes, but I'm very easy to find on the internet. I love to hear from audiences that I speak to, and I also take pictures of the audiences that I speak to, if you don't mind. Before I leave stage, I'm going to take a picture of all of you.
Don't put it on YouTube.
I may put it on Twitter, so smile. Make sure you're not sitting next to the wrong person. So part of the reason why I do this is that I figure that one day I'm going to have grandkids and they won't listen to me. Pull out these pictures and
Wait a minute, what about kids? My kids don't listen. Come on, are you kids? Grandkids don't listen to you.
I see. Well, this doesn't work on my daughter, so I've postponed the value of them to my grandkids. Anyway, I'll stop there, but I'm so delighted to be here. If there are any entrepreneurs in the audience who feel like they could benefit from chatting with me, or they need any help in any way, please feel free to reach out, and thank you for your time.
I request Ram to come up and please give the memento to Arun.